What happens when love collides with law, race, and vengeance? In post-Reconstruction Mobile, a widow made a choice so dangerous it could cost her everything by marrying the man once enslaved by her own household. The summer heat of 1890 lay thick over Mobile like a wool blanket, pressing down on the old antebellum homes that lined Government Street with their peeling paint and faded grandeur. In one such house, a 3-story Greek revival, with columns that had once gleamed white, but now bore the grey patina of neglect, Catherine Adelaide Thornton sat in her late husband's study, surrounded by 25 years of silence. She was 52 years old, though the mirror suggested something older. Her hair, once the color of Alabama clay after rain, had gone entirely silver. Her hands, which had once been soft and ringed with jewels, were now worn from work, the nails kept short and practical. The rings were long soled, along with most everything else of value. Through the window, she could see the garden her husband had once kept immaculate with the labor of 20 enslaved people. Now it was a tangle of Cherokee roses and resurrection ferns, beautiful in its wildness, but a constant reminder of how completely the world had changed. She held a letter in her hands, the paper thin as onion skin, the ink slightly blurred where her tears had fallen. It was from the bank, and its message was clear. She had 3 months to settle her debts or lose the house entirely. Catherine had known this day would come. It had been creeping toward her like the tide ever since her husband, Colonel Marcus Thornton, had died in 1887, leaving her with a house full of memories and a ledger full of debts. The war had taken their fortune, Reconstruction had taken their dignity. And now, the unforgiving arithmetic of the New South was taking their home. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She knew who it would be before she heard his voice. "Mrs. Thornton, I've finished with the East Garden. The jasmine needed severe cutting back, but it should bloom well next spring. Come in, Isaiah." The door opened, and Isaiah Washington stepped into the study. He was 54, 2 years her senior, though he moved with the easy strength of a younger man. His skin was the deep brown of rich Mississippi soil, and his hair, cropped close to his head, showed only traces of gray at the temples. He wore simple work clothes, canvas trousers, and a cotton shirt rolled to the elbows. But he carried himself with a quiet dignity that had always distinguished him. Isaiah had been born on this property in 1836. His mother had been the Thornton family's cook, his father a field hand. Marcus Thornton's father had taught Isaiah to read, a dangerous gift in those days, and had trained him as a house servant. When Marcus inherited the property in 1855, Isaiah had been 29 years old and had already spent nearly 2 decades managing the household's daily operations. Though no one would have called him a manager then, he was property legally speaking, though Marcus had relied on his judgment more than any white overseer. Catherine gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Isaiah. Please." He hesitated, as he always did. 25 years of freedom had not entirely erased the reflexes of the old world. "Please," she said again, more softly. He sat, his posture straight, his hands folded in his lap. She noticed, not for the first time, how beautiful his hands were, long-fingered and careful, hands that had built fences and tended gardens, and once had helped her husband tend to the books when Marcus's eyesight began to fail. "I received a letter from the bank," she said, placing the thin paper on the desk between them. "They're going to foreclose. 3 months." Isaiah's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, concern perhaps, or resignation? I see, he said quietly. I want you to know that you'll be taken care of, Catherine continued, her voice catching slightly. I've written to my sister in Montgomery. She has a small house with a garden. She'll need help, and she's agreed to pay you a fair wage. It's all arranged. Now his expression did change. His brow furrowed, and he leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Thornton, I'm not concerned about myself. What about you? Where will you go? She attempted a smile. My sister has offered me a room as well. We'll manage. We always have. Isaiah studied her face for a long moment. She had the strange sensation that he could see through all her careful pretenses to the fear beneath. You don't want to go to Montgomery, he said. It wasn't a question. No, she admitted. No, I don't. My sister and we haven't been close since before the war. She married well, you see. Her husband was prudent enough to move most of their wealth into European bonds before Fort Sumter. She's never quite forgiven me for marrying Marcus, or for staying here after the war when she begged us to come north. She thinks you were foolish. She knows I was foolish, and she's right. But it was our foolishness, Marcus's and mine. This was our home. This is still my home. Isaiah nodded slowly. He understood about homes and the weight of memory that made a place more than just walls and floors. There might be another way, he said after a moment. Catherine looked at him with surprise. What do you mean? He seemed to be choosing his words carefully, the way she'd seen him do when he had something important to say, but wanted to give her time to understand it on her own terms. The bank won't lend to you because you're a woman alone, without assets. But they would lend to a married couple, especially if the man had a trade and a good reputation. She stared at him, not quite comprehending. Isaiah, I don't understand what you're suggesting. He met her eyes directly, something he rarely did. I'm suggesting that we could marry Mrs. Thornton, Catherine. I have some money saved, not much, but enough to show the bank we're serious. I have my carpentry work, and I'm known to be reliable. Together, we might be able to convince them to restructure the debt. We could keep the house. The words hung in the air between them like smoke, impossible to dismiss or ignore. Catherine felt as though the floor had tilted beneath her chair. Marry Isaiah. The very thought was so far outside the realm of possibility that she couldn't quite grasp it. Isaiah, that's impossible. She finally managed. Even if we, people would never accept it. My God, it's barely been 25 years since slavery ended. In some parts of Alabama, it's still illegal for... In Alabama, it's been legal since the war ended, Isaiah corrected gently. The Republicans pushed through legislation during Reconstruction. The Democrats tried to make it illegal again in '77, but they didn't succeed. It's legal, Catherine. Difficult, yes, dangerous even, but legal. She realized he had used her first name. He had never done that before, not once in all the years she'd known him. The intimacy of it shocked her almost as much as his proposal. Why would you even suggest such a thing? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you risk so much? Isaiah was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the wild garden sprawled in the afternoon sun. I was 12 years old when your husband's father taught me to read, he said finally. Do you know what he told me? He said, Isaiah, I'm giving you a gift that makes you more dangerous than any weapon and more valuable than any tool. Use it well. He could have been whipped for teaching me. He could have lost his property, maybe even faced criminal charges. but he did it anyway. When the war ended, Colonel Thornton, Marcus, he called me into this very room. I thought he was going to dismiss me, tell me to leave. Instead, he offered me a wage to stay. He said he couldn't afford much, but he'd pay me what he could, and I'd have a place to live. He treated me like a man, Catherine, like someone whose labor had value. Not many white people did that in 1865. I've lived in this house for 54 years. I've tended this garden, fixed these walls, painted these columns. This is my home too. I don't want to see it fall into the hands of bankers who'll tear it down or let it rot. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. And there's another reason. These past 3 years since Marcus died, I've watched you carry this burden alone. I've seen you sell your jewelry, your mother's china, your husband's books. I've seen you go without so you could pay the property taxes. You've never treated me as less than human, Catherine, not once. Not even before the war, when I was your husband's property. You spoke to me with kindness, you learned my birthday, and made sure there was cake. Small things perhaps, but they mattered. I'm not proposing love, Catherine. I'm not fool enough to think we could pretend to feelings that aren't there. But I am proposing partnership, respect, a chance to save this place we both call home. If you can accept that, then yes, I'm willing to risk whatever comes. Catherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. The sheer improbability of the moment overwhelmed her, that she, Catherine Adelaide Thornton, daughter of a plantation owner, widow of a Confederate colonel, should be sitting in her dead husband's study, seriously contemplating marriage to a man who had once been enslaved by her husband's family. And yet she found herself thinking of the 25 years since the war had ended. 25 years of watching the old certainties crumble, of seeing proud families reduced to poverty, of witnessing the birth of a new South that didn't quite know what to make of itself. She had seen marriages of convenience between impoverished aristocrats and wealthy carpetbaggers. She had seen white women take employment in shops and factories, work that would have been unthinkable before the war. The world had already changed beyond recognition. Why not this too? "Let me think about it," she said finally. Give me a few days to consider. This isn't a decision to make lightly." Isaiah nodded and rose from his chair. At the door he paused and looked back at her. "Take whatever time you need, Catherine, but know this. Whatever you decide, I won't think less of you for it. And I'll help you however I can, marriage or no marriage." After he left, Catherine sat in the study as the afternoon light grew long and golden. Through the window, she could see Isaiah returning to the garden, his movements methodical and practiced. She watched him kneel by the rose bushes, pruning the dead wood with careful hands. A forbidden marriage, she thought. That's what people would call it. What they would whisper about in the streets, what they would condemn from pulpits, what they would use to justify any cruelty or violence they could muster. But was it more forbidden than the marriage of convenience she'd had with Marcus? They had been cordial, even fond, but never truly in love. Their marriage had been an arrangement between families, a joining of land and name. She had done her duty as a wife, borne him 2 children, both lost to yellow fever in 1871, and managed his household. But she had never known the kind of passionate love she'd read about in novels, never felt her heart race at a man's touch. What Isaiah was proposing was honest, at least, a partnership of mutual benefit, entered into with clear eyes and no false promises. The question was whether she had the courage to accept it. For 3 days, Catherine barely slept. She lay in her bed in the sweltering heat, listening to the night sounds of Mobile, the distant whistle of steamboats on the river, the chirping of crickets, the occasional shout from a passerby on Government Street. And she thought about everything that accepting Isaiah's proposal would mean. The practical considerations came first. Could they really convince the bank to restructure the debt? Would Isaiah's savings and income be enough to supplement what little she could contribute? She did the calculations in her head over and over, trying different scenarios, different numbers. But the practical questions were easier than the moral ones. She thought about her late husband, Marcus. What would he think of her marrying Isaiah? She remembered the way Marcus had treated Isaiah, the respect he'd shown him, even when the law said he was nothing more than property. Marcus had been a product of his time and place, unable or unwilling to question the fundamental injustice of slavery. But he'd been kinder than most. Would he understand? Or would he turn in his grave? She thought about her 2 children, Mary and James, buried in the Magnolia Cemetery after the fever took them at ages 5 and 7. What kind of world had she tried to raise them in? What kind of world would she be helping to build if she accepted Isaiah's proposal? She thought about her parents, long dead, and what they would say. Her father had owned 67 people when he died in 1859. He'd been proud of his wealth, proud of his position in mobile society. Her mother had been a stern woman who believed in the rigid hierarchies of the Old South with religious fervor. They would be horrified, she knew, absolutely horrified. But then she thought, what had their certainties gained them? Her father's fortune was gone, squandered in a war that never should have been fought. Her mother's rigid society had crumbled into poverty and resentment. The world they'd believed in so absolutely had turned out to be built on sand. On the second night, Catherine got out of bed and went to Marcus's study. She lit a lamp and took down a leather-bound journal from the shelf, Marcus's private diary, which she'd never had the courage to read after his death. Now she opened it and began to leaf through the pages. Most of it was mundane. Notes on crops, weather observations, social calls. But then, dated October 1863, during the darkest days of the war, she found an entry that made her breath catch. I received word today that Isaiah's brother Samuel was killed at Vicksburg. He had been conscripted to dig fortifications for the army, and a Union shell struck his work detail. Isaiah received the news with his customary composure, but I saw the pain in his eyes. I wanted to offer comfort, but what comfort can there be? Samuel died serving an army that fought to keep him enslaved. He died building walls to defend a nation that denied his humanity. I am complicit in this. Every day I am complicit. I tell myself that I treat my people well, that I am a benevolent master. But what does that word master mean if not a fundamental denial of another's right to be master of himself? Isaiah has more intelligence in his smallest finger than I have in my entire being, and yet the law says he is mine to own, to sell, to do with as I please. I do not know if God will forgive me. I am not certain I can forgive myself, but I promise this. If I survive this war, I will make what amends I can. It will never be enough, but perhaps it will be something. Catherine closed the journal with shaking hands. She had never known Marcus felt this way. He had always seemed so comfortable in his role, so assured. To discover this doubt, this self-awareness, this guilt, It changed something in her understanding of him. On the third day, Catherine walked through Mobile. She needed to see the city to understand what she would be risking if she accepted Isaiah's proposal. She walked down Government Street, past the old homes of families she'd known all her life. Some were well maintained, their owners having found ways to prosper in the New South. Others were falling into disrepair, their columns cracked, their gardens overgrown. The city was changing, layer upon layer of history, visible in every block. She passed the old slave market, now used as a warehouse. She passed the church where she'd been married in 1852, where her children had been baptized, where Marcus's funeral had been held. She passed the bank that now threatened to take her home. And she saw the people, white and black people, moving through the city in their separate spheres. Separate schools, separate churches, separate water fountains. Jim Crow was settling over the South like a suffocating fog. The brief promise of Reconstruction giving way to a new system of oppression that was, in some ways, more insidious than the old one. She saw the way white people looked at black people, the suspicion, the contempt, the casual cruelty. And she saw the way black people moved through the world, careful, always careful, aware that any misstep could mean violence or death. If she married Isaiah, she would become part of that. She would be looked at with suspicion and contempt. She would be ostracized from white society. She might face violence. Isaiah certainly would. But she also saw something else. She saw black families walking together, parents and children, laughing despite everything. She saw black businessmen opening shops, black teachers opening schools. She saw people building lives for themselves against incredible odds, refusing to be defeated by the weight of history. And she thought, Isaiah is one of those people. He survived slavery. He survived the war. He survived Reconstruction and the return of white supremacy. He built a life for himself from nothing. And now he was offering to share that life, that strength with her. That evening, Catherine asked Isaiah to meet her in the study again. He came, as he always did, prompt and proper. He stood by the door until she asked him to sit. And even then, he perched on the edge of the chair as though ready to leave at a moment's notice. I have some questions, Catherine said, and I need you to answer them honestly, even if you think the answer might offend me. Isaiah nodded. Of course. First, why have you never married? In 25 years of freedom, you must have had opportunities. He was quiet for a moment, and she thought she saw something like pain flicker across his face. I was married, he said finally, during slavery times. Her name was Hannah. She belonged to the Bridger family on the next plantation over. We jumped the broom in 1858 with Colonel Thornton's permission. We planned to have children, to build a life together as much as anyone could under those circumstances. Then the war came. The Bridger family sold off most of their people in 1863, including Hannah. I never found out where she went. After the war, I looked for her. I spent every spare penny I had traveling to other counties, other states, following rumors. I never found her. I don't know if she's alive or dead, if she remarried, or if she's still looking for me the way I looked for her. Catherine felt tears sting her eyes. Isaiah, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. No one did except Marcus. I asked him not to tell anyone. The pain was private, and I preferred to keep it that way. He paused, then continued. I never married again, because it felt like a betrayal, even though I knew Hannah would want me to move on, to find happiness if I could. But I never met anyone who made me forget her, and it seemed dishonest to marry without love. Then why are you proposing this now, to me? Because this isn't about love, Isaiah said simply. This is about survival, about preserving something worth preserving. I'm not asking you to love me, Catherine, or to pretend to feelings that would be false. I'm asking you to be my partner in a very practical arrangement. We'll each have what we need. You'll keep your home, I'll keep mine, and we'll face the world together instead of alone. It's honest in a way that many marriages are not. Catherine took a deep breath. Second question. What would you expect from this marriage? I mean in terms of intimacy. Isaiah met her eyes steadily. I would expect nothing beyond what you were willing to give. We're both too old to pretend to passions we don't feel. I'd be content with separate bedrooms, separate lives within the same house. Companionship, perhaps. Friendship, if we're fortunate. But nothing more unless you wished it. And if people assume we're intimate, let them assume. Their thoughts are their own business. Catherine nodded slowly. Third question. What would you want to be called? How would you want to present yourself? Isaiah smiled slightly. That's a complicated question. In private, you could call me Isaiah, as you do now. In public, I suppose I would be Mr. Washington, and you would be Mrs. Washington. We'd present ourselves as husband and wife, a respectable, married couple. Some people would refuse to acknowledge it, but that's their problem, not ours. You'd take the risk, the violence that might come. I've lived with the risk of violence every day of my life, Isaiah said quietly. Before the war, I could be whipped at any moment for any reason. After the war, I've had to navigate a world where white people resent my freedom and look for any excuse to put me back in my place. At least this way, I'd be risking something for a purpose, for a home, for a life. That's more than many people get. Catherine stood and walked to the window. The garden was deep in shadow now, the sun having set behind the old oak trees. She could see fireflies beginning to emerge, their lights winking in the gathering darkness. I spoke with my sister yesterday, she said, still facing the window. I telegraphed her and asked for her advice. I didn't tell her about your proposal. I couldn't, not in a telegram. But I asked her what she thought I should do about the house. What did she say? She said I should let it go. She said the past is dead and it's foolish to cling to it. She said I should come to Montgomery, find a respectable position as a governess or companion to some wealthy family, and live out my remaining years in quiet dignity. Catherine turned to face Isaiah. She's probably right. It would be the sensible thing to do, the safe thing. But you don't want to do the safe thing. No, Catherine said. No, I don't. I'm tired of being sensible. I was sensible when I married, even though I didn't love him. I was sensible when I stayed here after the war, even though we were losing everything. I've been sensible all my life, and what has it gained me? I'm alone, I'm poor, and I'm about to lose the only home I've ever known. So I'm going to do something completely impractical and probably foolish. I'm going to accept your proposal, Isaiah. If you're still willing, I'll marry you. The expression that crossed Isaiah's face was complex. Relief, gratitude, and something that might have been fear. I'm still willing, he said, and I promise you, Catherine, I'll do everything in my power to make sure you don't regret this. I suspect I'll regret it many times, Catherine said with a slight smile. But I'd regret losing this house more. When do you think we should do it? As soon as possible. Every day we wait is a day closer to foreclosure. I'll speak with the minister at the African Methodist Episcopal Church tomorrow. He's a good man, progressive in his thinking. He'll perform the ceremony if we explain the situation. The AME church, Catherine repeated. She had never set foot in a black church in her life. That's where you worship? Every Sunday for the past 15 years. You're welcome to join me this week if you'd like to meet Reverend Patterson before we ask him for this favor. Catherine nodded slowly. Another threshold to cross, another convention to break. All right. Yes, I'll come with you. Isaiah stood, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the study. Then, hesitantly, he extended his hand. Partners, then? Catherine looked at his hand, those long, careful fingers that had built and tended and preserved, and placed her own hand in his. His grip was warm and firm and honest. Partners, she agreed. Sunday morning dawned hot and heavy with humidity. Catherine dressed with unusual care, choosing a simple grey dress that seemed appropriate for church but wouldn't draw too much attention. As she pinned her silver hair into a neat bun, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, a 52-year-old white woman, preparing to attend a black church with a man who had once been her husband's slave and whom she intended to marry within the week. Isaiah knocked at precisely 9 o'clock. He wore his Sunday best, a suit that was slightly worn but clean and well-pressed, a white shirt and a tie. He looked dignified and handsome, and Catherine felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. "Ready?" he asked, "as ready as I'll ever be." They walked together through the streets of Mobile. It was early enough that few people were about, but those who were stared openly. Catherine kept her head high and her hand light on Isaiah's arm, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. The AME church was a modest wooden building in the black section of town, painted white with a simple steeple. As they approached, Catherine could hear singing, rich, powerful voices raised in harmony. The sound was so beautiful, it made her throat tighten. Isaiah led her up the steps and through the door. The singing stopped almost immediately, as every head in the congregation turned to look at them. There were perhaps 50 people present, all black, all dressed in their Sunday finest. The silence was absolute. A tall man in minister's robes stood at the pulpit. He was in his early 40s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that took in the situation immediately. He raised one hand in a gesture that seemed to be both welcome and command. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice carrying easily through the small church, "we have visitors this morning, Isaiah Washington, one of our most faithful members, and—" He paused, looking at Catherine with an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly, simply assessing. "And Mrs. Catherine Thornton, please find a seat. You are welcome in God's house." Isaiah led Catherine to a pew near the back. The people around them shifted, creating space, but no one spoke to them. Catherine could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. The service resumed. Reverend Patterson preached on the Book of Ruth, and Catherine found herself listening with unexpected attention. And Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." The minister's voice was passionate as he spoke about loyalty, about crossing boundaries, about choosing love and commitment over safety and tradition. Catherine wondered if he somehow knew about their plan, if Isaiah had already spoken with him. After the service, people filed out slowly, many of them glancing at Catherine with curiosity or suspicion. A few smiled at Isaiah but said nothing. Then an older woman approached them. She had white hair and wore a purple dress with a matching hat. "Isaiah Washington," she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. "You going to introduce me to your friend?" "Mrs. Clara Williams, this is Catherine Thornton. Catherine, Mrs. Williams is one of the founding members of this church." "Thornton," Mrs. Williams repeated, studying Catherine closely. "That was your husband who died a few years back." The Colonel. "Yes, ma'am. He treated Isaiah well, I heard, not like some of the others." She continued to stare at Catherine, and Catherine had the distinct sense of being tested. "What brings you to our church, Mrs. Thornton?" Catherine decided to be honest. "Isaiah invited me. I'm considering a significant decision, and I wanted to understand his faith, his community, before I made it." Mrs. Williams's eyes widened slightly, and Catherine saw understanding dawn. "I see. Well?" She looked at Isaiah, then back at Catherine. "That's a brave thing you're considering. Foolish, maybe, but brave. This world doesn't take kindly to people who cross the lines it draws." "I'm learning that," Catherine said quietly. "Are you prepared for what it will mean? The loss, the isolation. White folks will turn on you. Some of our folks will resent you too. Think you're trying to take something that doesn't belong to you." "I don't know if anyone can be prepared for that," Catherine admitted, "but I'm willing to try." Mrs. Williams studied her for another long moment, then nodded. "All right then. You come back next Sunday, Mrs. Thornton, and the Sunday after that. If you're going to be part of this community, you need to commit to it. Half measures won't do." "Yes, ma'am," Catherine said, feeling oddly like a schoolgirl being given instructions. After the congregation had dispersed, Reverend Patterson invited them into his small office at the back of the church. He sat behind a desk piled with books and papers and gestured for them to take the 2 chairs opposite. "Isaiah told me yesterday that you might be coming," he said, without preamble. "He also told me what you're planning. I'll be honest with you both. I have mixed feelings about it." "We understand," Catherine began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish, please. I have mixed feelings because I know the risks. I've seen what happens when black men and white women form relationships, consensual or not. I've preached at funerals for men who were lynched on suspicion of less than what you're planning. I've counseled widows and orphans left behind by that violence." He paused, his gaze moving between them. "But I've also preached every Sunday about the brotherhood of man, about the equality of all God's children, about the need to build a new South based on justice and mutual respect. If I refuse to marry you, I'm saying that my words are empty, that I don't really believe in the principles I preach. And I won't do that." Catherine felt relief flood through her. "Thank you, Reverend Patterson." "Don't thank me yet. I have conditions. First, you both need to be absolutely certain this is what you want. No doubts, no reservations. Once the ceremony is performed, there's no taking it back. Second, I want you to understand that this marriage will be recognized by some churches and some communities, but not by others. You'll be in a kind of legal and social limbo. Third, I want a promise from both of you that you'll protect each other. Mrs. Thornton, if white mobs come for Isaiah, will you stand with him? And Isaiah, if white society ostracizes Mrs. Thornton, will you provide for her?" "Yes," they said simultaneously. Reverend Patterson smiled slightly. "You didn't even have to think about it. That's a good sign. All right then, I'll perform the ceremony. When do you want to do this? As soon as possible, Isaiah said. We need to approach the bank with a marriage certificate to have any chance of restructuring Mrs. Thornton's debt. Wednesday evening then, 6 o'clock. Keep it small, just witnesses, no guests. The fewer people who know initially, the better. Once the marriage is registered with the county, it will become public knowledge soon enough. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine sorted through Marcus's papers, gathering all the documents they would need to present to the bank. Isaiah worked on a formal proposal, outlining their combined income and assets. They moved around each other carefully, still not quite comfortable with the momentous step they were about to take. On Wednesday afternoon, Catherine took her wedding ring from Marcus, a simple gold band that had sat in her jewelry box since his death, and slipped it on her finger one last time. Then she took it off and placed it in a small wooden box with the rest of the mementos she'd kept. His watch, his favorite cufflinks, a lock of their daughter's hair. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered. "I hope you'd understand." At 6 o'clock, they walked to the church together. This time, they entered not as visitor and host, but as bride and groom. Mrs. Clara Williams was there, along with her husband and 2 other church members, to serve as witnesses. They all stood near the altar, and Catherine felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Reverend Patterson wore his ceremonial robes. He looked at both of them seriously before beginning. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he intoned. "It is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. Isaiah and Catherine have come before this congregation and before God to be joined in holy matrimony." The words of the ceremony washed over Catherine. She heard herself repeating vows, promising to love and honor and cherish. She heard Isaiah's deep voice doing the same, steady and clear. When Reverend Patterson asked for rings, Isaiah produced a simple silver band, his mother's wedding ring, he told her later, one of the few possessions she'd managed to keep after emancipation. Catherine had no ring to give him. They'd discussed this, and Isaiah had said it didn't matter, but standing there, she felt the absence keenly. On impulse, she unpinned the small silver brooch she wore at her collar, a forget-me-not that had been her mother's, and pressed it into his palm. "For remembrance," she said softly. Isaiah's eyes widened, and she saw him swallow hard. He closed his fingers around the brooch and nodded. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Patterson said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." There was no kiss. That seemed too intimate for what they were doing. Instead, Isaiah took Catherine's hand in his, and they turned to face the witnesses. Mrs. Williams was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Her husband looked grim but approving. The other 2 witnesses seemed stunned, as though they couldn't quite believe what they'd just seen. They signed the marriage certificate, each witness adding their name. Catherine stared at her new signature, Catherine Washington, and felt as though she were looking at a stranger's name. "It's done," Isaiah said quietly. "Yes," Catherine agreed, "it's done." They walked home through the deepening dusk. Neither of them spoke much. What was there to say? They had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. They had become Mr. and Mrs. Washington, for better or worse. When they reached the house on Government Street, Isaiah paused at the door. "I'll sleep in the servants' quarters tonight," he said. As I always have, we can discuss other arrangements later, when we've had time to think. No, Catherine said, surprising herself. No, Isaiah. If we're going to do this, we have to do it properly. You'll take the guest bedroom on the second floor. It's across the hall from my room. We'll maintain separate spaces as we agreed, but you're my husband now. You're not a servant anymore. Isaiah looked at her for a long moment, and she saw emotions flickering across his face too quickly to name. Finally, he nodded. All right. Thank you. That night, Catherine lay in her bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else on the second floor. She heard Isaiah moving about in the guest room, heard the creak of floorboards, the sound of water being poured into a basin. It was strange to think that a man was sleeping just across the hall from her, not Marcus, who had been there for decades, but Isaiah, who had always been relegated to the distant quarters. She wondered what she had done. She wondered if it was courage or madness that had brought her to this point, and she wondered what tomorrow would bring. Thursday morning, Catherine and Isaiah dressed in their most respectable clothing and walked to the First Bank of Mobile. Catherine wore her best remaining dress, a dark blue silk that had been fashionable before the war. Isaiah wore his suit, the same one he'd worn to their wedding, with a new tie that Catherine had insisted on purchasing for him that morning. We need to present ourselves as a prosperous couple, she'd said. Appearances matter, especially to bankers. The bank was housed in a Greek revival building that had somehow survived the war intact. Inside, the marble floors gleamed and the tellers worked behind brass cages. Catherine approached the nearest teller, a young man with slicked back hair and a thin mustache. I need to speak with Mr. Jameson, she said, regarding my mortgage. The teller glanced at Isaiah, who stood slightly behind Catherine. His expression flickered with confusion, then something darker. Mr. Jameson is very busy, ma'am. Perhaps you could schedule— It's Mrs. Washington now, Catherine interrupted. And I have an appointment. He's expecting me at 9 o'clock. The teller's eyes widened as he took in the implications of her new name and the man standing with her. I'll check with his secretary. He disappeared through a door behind the cages. Catherine could hear muffled voices, then silence. After several long minutes, the teller returned with an older man in an expensive suit. Mrs. Thornton, the older man said, deliberately using her former name. I'm Horace Jameson. I manage the mortgage department. Mrs. Washington, Catherine corrected firmly. And this is my husband, Isaiah Washington. We have a proposal regarding the restructuring of my late husband's debt. Jameson's face had gone rigid. He looked from Catherine to Isaiah and back again, and Catherine saw the calculations happening behind his eyes. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office, he said finally. They followed him through the door and down a hallway, lined with portraits of the bank's founding fathers, all white men with stern expressions and elaborate whiskers. Jameson's office was spacious, with a large mahogany desk and windows overlooking the street. Please sit, Jameson said, gesturing to 2 chairs. He sat behind his desk and folded his hands, his expression carefully neutral. Now, Mrs. Washington, what is this proposal? Isaiah reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder of papers. Mr. Jameson, we've prepared a comprehensive plan for repaying the debt on the property at 1247 Government Street. If you'll review these documents, you'll see that we're proposing a restructured payment schedule over 10 years, with interest at the current rate of 6%. Jameson took the papers but didn't look at them. Instead, He stared at Isaiah. "You're proposing this?" "We're proposing it together," Catherine said. "My husband and I." "Your husband?" Jameson set the papers down on his desk, as though they might contaminate him. "Mrs. Thornton, I don't know what sort of arrangement you've entered into, but it's not an arrangement, Mr. Jameson. It's a marriage legally performed and registered with the county. Here's our marriage certificate." Catherine produced the document from her handbag and placed it on the desk. Jameson glanced at it, and his face flushed red. This is highly irregular." "It's perfectly legal," Isaiah said calmly, "and it's relevant to our proposal, because it demonstrates that the property now belongs to a married couple with combined income and assets. I've attached documentation of my savings currently held at the Freedmen's Bank, as well as records of my carpentry business over the past 5 years. As you'll see, I have a steady income and an excellent reputation for reliable work." "I'm sure you do," Jameson said, his tone making it clear he meant nothing of the sort. "But this bank has standards. We cannot simply—" "What standards?" Catherine asked. "The standard that says a white widow with no assets cannot secure a loan, but a married couple with demonstrated income can. Because that's what your own policies state, Mr. Jameson. I've read them. There's nothing in your written policies that prohibits interracial marriage from being considered in loan applications." Jameson's flush deepened. "Perhaps not in writing, but there are considerations, social considerations. The bank has a reputation to maintain." "And what reputation is that?" Catherine's voice was sharp now, years of frustration crystallizing into anger. "The reputation of a bank that enforces racial hierarchies, or the reputation of a bank that follows the law and treats all legitimate customers fairly. Mrs. Thornton, Mrs. Washington, this is not a matter of law. This is a matter of propriety, of decent society." Isaiah leaned forward. "Mr. Jameson, let me be very clear. We're not asking for charity. We're not asking for special treatment. We're offering to repay every cent that's owed with interest on a reasonable schedule. If you refuse this proposal, you'll foreclose on the property, sell it at auction, and likely recover less than the total debt. We're offering you a better deal financially. The only reason you might refuse is prejudice, and I don't think the bank's board of directors would appreciate knowing that their mortgage manager turned down a profitable arrangement because of personal bias." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jameson's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating facts," Isaiah said. "Facts that could be presented to your superiors or to the newspaper or to any number of interested parties. The question is whether you're willing to put your prejudice before your bank's interests." A long silence filled the office. Catherine could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece, could hear the distant sounds of the bank's business continuing beyond the closed door. She held her breath. Finally, Jameson picked up the papers. He read through them slowly, his expression giving nothing away. When he finished, he set them down and looked at Isaiah. "Your financials are in order," he admitted grudgingly, "and your proposal is reasonable. I'll present it to the loan committee. They meet next Thursday." "And you'll recommend approval?" Catherine pressed. Jameson's jaw tightened. "I'll present it objectively. What they decide is up to them." "That's all we ask," Isaiah said, though his tone suggested he knew exactly how Jameson would present it. They left the bank with no guarantees, but at least they'd gotten their foot in the door. As they walked back toward Government Street, Catherine felt exhausted, as though she'd run a great distance. "That was harder than I expected," she admitted. "That was only the beginning," Isaiah said quietly. "Once word spreads about our marriage, it will get much harder." He was right, of course. By that afternoon, the news was all over Mobile. Catherine first learned how fast gossip could travel when her sister telegraphed from Montgomery. "What have you done? Stop, come to Montgomery immediately. Stop this madness, must be stopped. Stop Margaret." She stared at the telegram, delivered by a boy who couldn't meet her eyes. How had Margaret learned so quickly? Then she realized the marriage certificate was a public record. Anyone could have checked the county registry, and apparently someone had done exactly that. The second indication came when Catherine went to the market on Friday morning. She'd shopped at Morrison's grocery for 20 years, and Mr. Morrison had always treated her with courtesy, even after her circumstances had declined. But when she walked through the door that morning, he looked up from his ledger and his face went cold. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't serve you." Catherine stopped in the middle of the shop, a basket over her arm. "Excuse me?" "I said I can't serve you. I'd like you to leave my establishment. Mr. Morrison, I've been a customer here for 2 decades. That was before. His voice was hard. "I don't serve race traitors. Get out." The other customers had stopped shopping to watch. Catherine saw Mrs. Henderson from the Methodist Church, who'd once invited her to tea. Mrs. Henderson turned away, deliberately cutting her. She saw young Tommy Fletcher, who used to deliver her groceries. He spat on the floor at her feet. Catherine set down her basket very carefully and walked out of the shop with her head high. But her hands were shaking, and by the time she reached the house, tears were streaming down her cheeks. Isaiah found her sitting in the parlor, still wearing her hat and gloves, staring at nothing. "What happened?" he asked gently. She told him. As she spoke, she watched his face and saw no surprise there, only a deep, weary sadness. "I'm sorry," he said when she finished. "I knew it would be bad, but I'd hoped we might have more time before it started." "How do you bear it?" Catherine asked. "How have you borne this kind of treatment your entire life?" Isaiah sat down across from her. "You learn to carry it," he said quietly, "like a weight on your back. Some days it's lighter, some days heavier, but it's always there. You learn to find small joys in spite of it. You learn to build a life in the margins they leave you. I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are. You just haven't had to be before." He paused, then added, "And you're not alone in this. That's the difference between what you're experiencing now and what I've always faced. You have me, and I have you. We'll carry this weight together." Over the next week, the ostracism intensified. Catherine's remaining friends stopped calling. Her sister sent another telegram, more desperately worded than the first, begging her to annul the marriage and leave Mobile. The Methodist Church, where Catherine had worshipped for decades, asked her not to return. But there were also surprises. Mrs. Clara Williams from the AMP Church appeared at their door with a basket of food. "Heard Morrison's won't serve you," she said briskly. "There's a market in our part of town, Mr. Johnson's place. He'll serve you, and his prices are fair." I wrote down the address. 3 days later, a white woman Catherine didn't recognize knocked on the door. She was young, perhaps 30, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. "Mrs. Washington, my name's Alice Porter. I heard about what you did, marrying your husband's freedman. I wanted to tell you. Well, I think it's brave. My husband died in the war, and I've been trying to keep our farm going on my own. The bank won't lend to me, and I'm about to lose everything. What you did, standing up to them, demanding they treat you fairly, it gives me hope that maybe things can change. Catherine invited her in for tea, and they talked for an hour. When Alice left, Catherine felt lighter than she had in days. On Thursday, they returned to the bank for the loan committee's decision. Jameson met them in the lobby, his expression stiff. "The committee has reviewed your proposal," he said without preamble. "They've decided to approve a restructured payment plan, though not quite on the terms you proposed. The interest rate will be 7% instead of 6%, and they want quarterly payments instead of annual ones." Catherine felt relief flood through her. "We accept." "There's one more condition." Jameson looked at Isaiah directly for the first time. "The property must be registered in both your names as joint owners. That's unusual, but the committee felt it was necessary. Given the circumstances, they want to ensure that if anything happens to either of you, the debt is still secured." Isaiah nodded. "That's acceptable." They signed the new mortgage papers in Jameson's office, witnessed by a clerk who looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. When it was done, Catherine held the papers in her hands and felt a fierce triumph. They'd saved the house. Against all odds, they'd saved it. The summer of 1890 turned into fall, and gradually, Catherine and Isaiah settled into their new life. It was strange at first, learning to share space with someone after years of solitude. They established rhythms and routines. Isaiah would rise early to tend the garden before beginning his carpentry work. Catherine would manage the household accounts and do the marketing at Mr. Johnson's store in the black part of town. In the evenings, they would often sit in the parlor together, Catherine reading while Isaiah worked on small woodworking projects or mended tools. They talked more than Catherine had expected. Not about anything earth-shattering, just the small observations that accumulate in a day. Isaiah told her about the customers he'd worked for, the houses he was helping to repair or build. Catherine shared gossip she'd overheard at the market, or interesting passages from books she was reading. One evening in October, as they sat in the parlor with the windows open to catch the cooler air, Catherine looked up from her book to find Isaiah watching her. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking," he said slowly, "that this is the most peaceful I've felt in years, maybe in my whole life, despite everything that's happened, despite the way people treat us. There's something right about this, about us being here in this house together." Catherine closed her book. "I feel it too. I didn't expect to, but I do. It's strange. I was married to Marcus for 35 years, and I never felt this sense of partnership. We were cordial, even fond, but we weren't partners in the way you and I are." "What do you think made the difference?" Catherine considered the question. "Honesty, perhaps. We entered this marriage with no illusions, no false promises. We both knew exactly what we were agreeing to, and somehow that clarity has created a kind of intimacy that pretense never could." Isaiah smiled slightly. "Mrs. Clara Williams stopped me after church last Sunday. She said we look happy. I told her that was ridiculous, that ours is a practical arrangement. She just laughed at me." "Was she wrong?" Catherine asked quietly. Isaiah met her eyes. "No," he said. "No, I don't think she was." The holidays approached, and Catherine dreaded them. Christmas had always been a family time, and the absence of Marcus and her children always weighed heaviest during that season, but Isaiah surprised her. "I've been thinking," he said one morning in early December, "we should host Christmas dinner. Invite some people from the church and maybe that Mrs. Porter who came to visit. Make this house feel alive again." "Do you think anyone would come?" "I think more people would come than you expect. There's a whole community of people like us. People who've crossed lines, broken rules, refused to accept the limitations others try to impose. They need to know they're not alone." So they sent out invitations, and on Christmas Day, 16 people gathered in the dining room of the old house on Government Street. There was Mrs. Clara Williams and her husband, Reverend Patterson and his wife, Alice Porter, two other mixed-race couples who'd heard about Catherine and Isaiah's marriage, and several members of the AME Church. It was a strange gathering, white and black people sitting together at a table, sharing food and conversation as equals. In most of Mobile, such a scene would have been unthinkable. But here, in this house that had survived slavery and war and Reconstruction, it felt natural. After dinner, Reverend Patterson stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, "to our hosts, Catherine and Isaiah Washington, who have shown us what courage looks like. They've reminded us that the lines society draws are not immutable, that we can choose to cross them to build new kinds of families and communities. They've given us hope. To Catherine and Isaiah." "To Catherine and Isaiah," the guests echoed. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at Isaiah and saw that he was moved as well. He reached under the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Later that night, after the guests had left and they were cleaning up together, Isaiah said, "Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it wasn't easy for you." "It was wonderful," Catherine said honestly. "I haven't felt this much like I belong somewhere in years, maybe ever." "That's because you do belong," Isaiah said. "Here, with me, with these people. We're building something new, Catherine, something that didn't exist before." As winter turned to spring, Catherine found herself falling into a routine she'd never expected to have. She attended the AME church every Sunday, and though some members still regarded her with suspicion, others had begun to accept her. She helped Mrs. Williams organize a fundraiser for the church's school. She befriended Alice Porter and introduced her to a lawyer who helped her restructure her farm's debts. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, her relationship with Isaiah deepened. They'd maintained separate bedrooms as they'd agreed, but sometimes Catherine would wake in the night and find comfort in knowing he was just across the hall. Once, when she'd been ill with a fever, he'd sat by her bedside all night, reading to her and bringing her water. When his arthritis flared up in the damp spring weather, she'd made him willow bark tea and insisted he rest while she took over some of his garden work. They were becoming what they'd promised to be, partners, but somewhere along the way, they'd also become friends. The trouble came in July, during the hottest part of the summer. Isaiah had been hired to repair the porch of a house on the edge of town, a white family named the Calhouns. The job was routine, and the pay was good. He'd worked for 3 days, replacing rotted boards and reinforcing the structure. On the 4th day, he didn't come home. Catherine waited through dinner, then through the evening, growing more anxious with each passing hour. It wasn't like Isaiah to be late without sending word. By 10 o'clock, she was pacing the parlor, looking out the window every few minutes. Finally, at 11, there was a knock at the door. She rushed to open it and found Reverend Patterson standing on the porch, his face grim. Where is he? Catherine demanded. What's happened? He's alive, Reverend Patterson said quickly. But he's hurt. There was an incident at the Calhoun house. Catherine grabbed her shawl. Take me to him. Isaiah was at the Reverend's house, lying on a cot in the front room. His face was bruised and swollen, one eye completely closed. His shirt was torn and bloodied. When Catherine saw him, she felt something break open inside her chest. "Oh my God," she breathed, dropping to her knees beside the cot. "Isaiah, what happened?" He tried to smile, but it turned into a wince. "There was a misunderstanding," he said, his voice raspy. "Mr. Calhoun's daughter came out to the porch while I was working. We talked for a few minutes. She was asking about the repairs, that was all. But her father saw us and he thought I was being inappropriate with her." "He did this to you?" "Him and his 2 sons. They beat me and told me never to come back. Then they threw me in the street and said if they saw me near their property again, they'd kill me." Catherine felt rage burning in her chest, hot and fierce. "We're going to the police. We're pressing charges." Isaiah shook his head, then winced again at the movement. "Catherine, no. It won't do any good. The police won't take my word against a white man's. All it will do is make things worse." "I don't care. They can't just—" "They can," Isaiah said quietly. "And they did. This is what I tried to warn you about, Catherine. This is the world we live in. I can be beaten, even killed, and there will be no consequences for the men who do it." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "It's not right. It's not right." "No," Isaiah agreed. "It's not. But that doesn't change the reality." Mrs. Patterson, the Reverend's wife, brought bandages and salve. She showed Catherine how to clean Isaiah's wounds and apply the medicine. "He'll heal," she said gently. "The body is resilient. But you need to prepare yourself, Mrs. Washington. This won't be the last time. As long as you're married to a black man in the South, this kind of violence will always be a possibility." Catherine stayed with Isaiah all night, refusing to leave even when the Reverend offered to sit with him. She watched him sleep, his breathing labored, his face swollen and discolored. And she made a decision. In the morning, when Isaiah woke, she was sitting beside him, still wearing her clothes from the previous day. "Catherine," he said, "you should go home. Get some rest." "I've been thinking," she said, ignoring his suggestion. "We should leave Mobile." Isaiah stared at her. "What?" "We should go north, to Pennsylvania or New York, somewhere the racial climate is less hostile. We could sell the house, use the money to start fresh, somewhere safer." "Catherine, that house is your home. You fought so hard to keep it. And I'd give it up in a heartbeat if it meant you'd be safe." She took his hand, carefully avoiding the bruised knuckles. "When we married, I knew there would be difficulties. I thought I understood what that meant, but seeing you like this—" "Isaiah, I can't lose you. I've lost too many people I care about. I won't lose you too." Something shifted in Isaiah's expression. "You care about me." "Of course I care about you," Catherine said, surprised by the question. "How could I not? You're my husband, my partner, my—" She stopped, realizing what she'd been about to say. "You're what?" Isaiah asked softly. "My friend," Catherine said. "My dear friend. And perhaps something more than that. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between that first conversation in Marcus's study and now, I've come to care for you in ways I never expected. Not because I had to, but because you're worth caring for." Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I care for you too, Catherine, more than I probably should, given the nature of our arrangement. You've brought light back into my life. You've made me believe that I could have something more than mere survival." They looked at each other, and Catherine felt the distance that had always existed between them. The careful propriety, the maintained boundaries, finally collapse. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, mindful of his injuries. "So will you consider it?" she asked, leaving mobile, starting fresh. Isaiah sighed. "Let me heal first. Then we'll talk about the future. But Catherine, thank you for caring, for staying, for being willing to give up your home for me. That means more than I can say." Over the next week, as Isaiah recovered, Catherine found herself thinking constantly about the future. She walked through the house on Government Street, touching the walls, looking at the rooms where she'd spent so much of her life. This place held her history, her marriage to Marcus, the births and deaths of her children, decades of memories both bitter and sweet. But it also held the ghosts of slavery, the weight of a system that had stolen Isaiah's freedom, his family, his right to build a life on his own terms. Could she really choose this house over his safety, over their future together? The answer, she realized, was no. The house was important, but Isaiah was more important. What they'd built together, this unlikely partnership that had become something deeper and truer than she'd imagined possible, that was worth more than any building, any memory. When Isaiah was well enough to walk again, she sat him down in the parlor and laid out her thoughts. "I mean it," she said. "I want us to leave. I want us to go somewhere. We can build a life without constantly looking over our shoulders. Somewhere our marriage won't mark us for violence." Isaiah listened carefully. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's do it. Let's go north." They spent the next 3 months preparing. Isaiah finished his remaining carpentry jobs and collected his fees. Catherine began sorting through the house, deciding what to keep and what to sell. They put the property on the market, and after some negotiation, found a buyer. Ironically, a freedman who'd made money in the shipping business and wanted to buy one of the old antebellum homes as a symbol of how far he'd come. The AMER church threw them a farewell party. Mrs. Clara Williams wept openly. "You two gave us hope," she said. "Seeing you build a life together, seeing you choose each other despite everything, it mattered. Don't forget us when you're up north living in luxury." "We could never forget," Catherine assured her. "And I suspect luxury is a bit optimistic. We'll be starting from scratch." Alice Porter came to say goodbye as well. She'd managed to save her farm and had even hired 2 freedmen to help work the land. "You changed my life," she told Catherine. "You showed me that women don't have to accept the limitations men try to impose on us. I'll always be grateful." In October of 1891, Catherine and Isaiah boarded a train heading north. They'd chosen Philadelphia as their destination. It had a large and established black community, and Isaiah had a cousin there who'd offered to help them get settled. As the train pulled out of the station, Catherine looked back at Mobile disappearing behind them. She felt a pang of loss, but also a sense of liberation. She was leaving behind the weight of her past, the expectations of her old life, the narrow confines of Southern society. Isaiah reached over and took her hand. "Having second thoughts?" "No," Catherine said firmly. "No second thoughts. Only forward thoughts." He smiled and squeezed her hand. They sat in the colored section of the train car because that was safest for both of them. Catherine had insisted, over Isaiah's protests, that she could sit in the white section if she wanted. "We're in this together," she'd said. "That means facing the same restrictions, the same indignities. I won't accept privileges you don't have." The journey north took 3 days. They watched the landscape change outside the window. The red clay and pine forests of Alabama, giving way to the rolling hills of Virginia, then the industrial cities of Pennsylvania. Each mile felt like both an ending and a beginning. Philadelphia was overwhelming at first. It was so much larger than Mobile, so much busier and more diverse. But Isaiah's cousin, Thomas, was welcoming. He helped them find a small row house in a mixed neighborhood where several interracial couples lived. "It's not perfect here either," Thomas warned them. "There's still prejudice, still discrimination, but it's better than the South. You can walk down the street together without fear of being lynched. That's something." Isaiah found work as a carpenter relatively quickly. His skills were in demand, and while some customers balked when they realized he was married to a white woman, enough were willing to look past it that he could make a decent living. Catherine took in sewing and mending, and eventually began teaching reading and writing to freedmen and their children in the evenings. They attended a mixed church where several interracial couples worshipped. They made friends, slowly at first, but steadily. They built a life. One evening, about 6 months after their arrival in Philadelphia, they were sitting in their small parlor. It was snowing outside, big fat flakes that Catherine still found magical, even though Isaiah teased her about her southern wonder at winter weather. "Are you happy?" Isaiah asked suddenly. Catherine looked up from her sewing. "Yes," she said, surprised by how true it was. "Yes, I'm happy. Are you?" "I am." He set down the chair leg he'd been sanding and looked at her seriously. "Catherine, I know when we married, we agreed it was a practical arrangement. No expectations of love or intimacy. But these past months, living here with you, building this life together, I find that my feelings have changed. I love you, Catherine, not because I have to, not out of gratitude, but because of who you are. Your courage, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to accept injustice. I love you." Catherine set down her sewing, her hands trembling slightly. "I love you too," she said. "I think I've loved you for a while now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it might complicate things, or that you might feel obligated to reciprocate." "Nothing about my feelings is obligatory," Isaiah said. He stood and crossed to where she sat, then knelt beside her chair. "Catherine Washington, we're already married, so I can't ask you to marry me. But I can ask you this. Will you let this be a real marriage? Not just in name, not just as partners, but as husband and wife in every sense." Catherine cupped his face in her hands, mindful of the scars from the beating he'd taken in Mobile. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." They kissed then, for the first time. It was tender and sweet, and carried the weight of everything they'd been through together. The forbidden marriage, the ostracism, the violence, the journey north. It was a kiss that acknowledged all the barriers they'd crossed and all the ones that still remained. That night, for the first time, Isaiah didn't sleep in the guest room. They lay together in Catherine's bed, fully clothed at first because they were both nervous. But gradually, with great tenderness and care, they learned each other. They discovered that desire didn't always come like lightning. Sometimes it grew slowly, fed by respect and partnership and the deep knowledge of another person's heart. They made love quietly, almost reverently, and afterward lay tangled together in the dark. "I never thought I'd have this," Isaiah said, his voice rough with emotion. "After I lost Hannah, after years of just surviving, I never thought I'd know love again. And certainly not like this, not with someone who sees me as an equal, who chose me freely." "I never thought I'd have it either," Catherine admitted. "My first marriage was about duty. This one was supposed to be about practicality. But somehow, it became about love, about choosing each other again and again, despite everything the world threw at us." "And do you think we'll keep choosing each other?" Isaiah asked. Catherine turned to face him in the darkness. "Every day," she said, "for as long as we both shall live. That's what I choose.